Welcome, everybody. Today we're going to talk about the most expensive copy and paste in the Australian government history. This, of course, comes from the company of Deloitte and the $440,000 report that they delivered that had a bunch of problems in it. So let's dive into it today and talk about what I've been talking about for enterprise AI for the last couple of years, which is having good governance and good controls around the use of AI. So if you haven't seen this news story, this happened back in July. Deloitte delivered a $440,000 report to the Department of Employment and Workplace Relations down in Australia. So the report was something that they had contracted Deloitte to produce for them. Deloitte had run all of the report into ChatGPT 4.0 to help them write the report and to build out the information in the report. The problem is ChatGPT 4.0 decided to create some hallucinations. So it had citations that were not real. It even used, and they interviewed after the fact, a book author who never wrote a book that was cited in the report. And this happened a couple times. So some of the citations of valid information was being cited. The author did write books around that subject, but had never published the book that was in the citation and never had said exactly what was being cited to that particular author. So, the problem here, Deloitte took the Azure instance of ChatGPT 4 and generated the core analysis. No human validated what it was putting into the framework of that analysis, and there was no validation layer after the report. So the fact-checking protocols were not used by Deloitte to make sure that everything that was put out. You probably could have taken this report from ChatGPT, run it over to Perplexity, and ask it to validate the citation. So that's something you could do today. But the ChatGPT 4, I don't fault here because it's actually a phenomenal model. It's about the process failure. So this is where, as a leader of a tech company, we need to make sure that we fully understand what AI is able to do, what it actually does, how it is able to be deployed in our enterprise environments responsibly. So for those here joining us for the first time, I'm Eric Garrison. I'm the CTO and founder of WTE Solutions. And today I'm going to show you the right way to do some of this technology. And we're going to talk about AI agents, validations, architecture, and why your IT departments need to become familiar with these tools to avoid becoming the next Deloitte headline. So let's talk about the first thing, which is the way and the types of AI. So this is something that I get asked all the time about the different models, but everybody's very focused on a particular model, but really at its heart, the models are really what people are using are tied to the chatbots or what they're thinking about. So a chatbot is when you go to ChatGPT and it gives you that prompt to type things in. So ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, Perplexity, all of those, when you're going via the web interface, you're using the chatbot. So this is reactive. So this is, you're going to ask it a question, it's going to give you an answer. You can think of it this way as it's like an intern with a PhD. So in a lot of ways, it has a lot of book knowledge. It just doesn't have the common sense. It's waiting for the instructions. It needs to be told what information to pull, for what purpose, and what avatar you're trying to talk to and pull this out. So it's great for research, drafting, brainstorming, one-off questions, proofreading, and type reviews. Where you have to watch on it is going to be just like Deloitte, you're going to have to validate what's coming back out of it. So it can be used in a lot of good ways to help speed up your process. We were just hearing about how a government contracting company is using it to help go through bid evaluations on whether they should bid on a particular GSA contract or not. And the error rate on is about 25%. So it may be not answering all the questions, but it took 8 hours of analysis down to 10 minutes. So what you now need to do is put that human factor for another hour to get that benefit and say, we're going to spend an hour and 10 minutes on this review instead of 8 hours. And that will take that gap of, the 25% fake or hallucination they could be doing, or maybe kicking out things and make that more accurate. So next thing is copilots. So this is a big thing that gets talked about today. Copilots are Microsoft Copilot. It is the best known one. That's why I call it the Copilots. Cursor, GitHub Copilot for coding. These are going to be your assistants are able to work and take a group of tasks and be able to do certain things with it. So they're using the LLMs that are also tied to those chatbots, but now you're deploying them to be like your sidekick, where you have it do what you want it to do. So accelerate workflows, create Word documents, Excel documents, create your Excel formulas. If you're creating code, VS Code. So you can have those copilots work and do things behind the scenes and do those type of assistant type things for you. Then you get into agents. And on our YouTube channel, we talk a lot about different agent projects and processes. This is where Make, N8N, and Zapier, as well as Lindy AI and Relay App and a number of other ones are in play. If you're really good with a product like a Claude or ChatGPT, now with the fact that they do MCP natively inside of them and some of the automations, you can do a lot of this inside of them natively, but it's still not as robust and able to plug in as easily into the ecosystems like Make, N8N, and Zapier can. They have really big ecosystems. They make it easy to, if you don't know how to use an API, how to act like you know how to use an API, how to hook it to your O365 for an OAuth authentication, how you can hook it up. Again, I really suggest if you're in the enterprise environment, if you're a CEO, don't be using Make. Don't be using Zapier. Get your IT department or get tech people who know, because you really want to make sure that you have those guardrails and that you are only sharing the data and authentication for where you need to. You want to give it least privileges. You don't want to have it be able to take in all of your HR data over to a platform that doesn't need to have the HR data. So that's really where you can use these and really get these benefits from them. If you're in O365, make sure that data loss prevention is turned on for everything going into it. What we want to do is, not get into, of course, the Deloitte. We want to treat the chatbot like an agent. We want to ask for, to make a general analysis, but then we need to verify. Now, when you go into an agent mode, you need to make sure you've got those checks and balances, that this framework is not going into a validation. You want to send it to a human in the loop control output. So basically, and the way I do this, when we go into production, I don't make the output dependent on the human. I make it so that there is a human going and checking what is going there. If we're in a production mode, we're in a test mode, the human is proofing. So at that point is where you make that decision of whether the human is the one that is controlling the release of the content. And that's what Deloitte should have done. They should have gone in and make sure that the AI outputs are accurate, because Deloitte, they're a huge company. They had to give a $100,000 refund roughly. They got a second chance at this. Your company may not get a second chance. This could be one of those things, if you put out the wrong information, you could have legal risk, you could have compliance risk, you could have reputation risk, you could have people on webinars and YouTube talking about you like I am about Deloitte, which, by the way, I know a lot of people there think they're really good people. This was bad and this happened, but what I want to do is make sure that we have the right controls. And there's a lot of cases where you don't want to use AI unless you need to use AI. So you're going to look at your processes and make sure that AI is the right piece to fix that solution. Sometimes we keep throwing AI, or companies are throwing AI, at problems that are more like decision trees or research aspects. So look at what your problems are as you start this, so that you're fixing the problem first, and then AI will amplify what is good in the process, and also amplify what's bad in the process. So you want to make sure that you've understood how you're deploying it, and that's what Deloitte didn't do. They amplified the bad. They amplified the hallucinations and didn't have the controls, so that's why that process happened there. Now, let's say, how can we do this very safely and dip our toe in the water? So the next thing we're going to talk about here is going to be, that safe entry point, Microsoft Copilot. So most people know Microsoft O365. This is a great place to start. A lot of CEOs and CIOs I know are nervous about AI, and they want to start with something, I want them to start with something they use, which is going to be Microsoft 365. So the great thing about Copilot, there's no real tools to learn. It just gives you that better version. That little Copilot button gives you a little bit better version of your Word, Excel, and PowerPoint and Outlook. So it gives you that assistant that allows you. It also gives IT that supervisory role that you can stay in control and let Copilot be your model, and you suggest what is going to be allowed out there to the users. Copilot is great for being able to start and pilot things out. There's a lot of different controls in it. What I suggest you do is start small. Start with having it keep your meeting transcriptions, then scale up to data analysis. Make the mistakes while we're in a draft and control mode before we go into production with everything that we do on the outside. So where do you start with this? And this is where we got a quick video here to show you this in actual action. Start with a notebook. Notebook is the easiest place. Go into your office.com, go into Copilot, and on the left there, you should see something around notebooks. So this is where you're going to collect notes in one place. It's a great place to create meeting notes, research, decisions. It's a great location to put some of your company data. So don't put a huge amount of the company data to start, but put in a bunch of your marketing data and where you're trying to go and what you're trying to do. If you're trying to grow your company from 5 to 10, put that is the goal and here are the markets you're going to do. Think of it as a great place to help to research assistance, not just replacement. You gotta give it the data. The next thing you can do inside that same interface, use the audio overviews. I use this quite a bit. Sometimes I'll get a huge email and I will ask it to give me an audio recap of it. And it can give you basically a podcast of some of your notes that are going inside the company. I've even had it give me an update on what are the current documents that were posted up in our company SharePoint share areas. So it can take those meeting notes and convert them into audio. So it's a great strategy when you have a long document to read you a summary to be able to save time and to allow you to multitask, because that's what we're looking for. We're looking for good ways to get that little bit of edge and save a little time between meetings. I'll throw an earbud in and give me a recap of what's going on so I'm not missing certain things. The next thing to do with the notebook, we want to keep consistency. Put your brand kit in there. In my company, we have brand kits that are sitting out in Canva so that everything we create in Canva ends up using the right branding, the right color, the right fonts and everything. Put those into your Copilot. The reason for that is then when you're creating your PowerPoints or your Word documents, your cover pages can fit your branding. It can fit your color. It can fit your fonts. Microsoft actually just announced a new image generation piece of technology that is actually pretty good. It's meant for creating high quality images. So now you can create high quality images on brand. Let Copilot keep you on brand messaging by having the things that you want to reinforce. If you've got certain CTAs, if you've got things that you're trying to emphasize in a board deck or in a type of presentation, make sure that you're putting that in and run content into it. So I've even taken and scraped content of our own website, put here into the notebook so that it uses the same terminology that we have on the web into some of the documents. So that's where you can create pages inside that notebook that have that information, and it becomes a great way to make sure that everything is following, and it makes the AI kind of an extra team member, because now you don't have to go back to the website and make sure everything's on message. So the other thing that I do with the notebooks, or suggest you do, is going to be around your prompting. So if you've got things that you've used frequently with Excel to be able to make your pivot tables and your VLOOKUPs. Everybody I know, I don't know why so many executives now are trying to become experts of the VLOOKUP and the pivot table. Luckily now you've got a third party to help you debug it, which is Copilot. But you want to make sure you're doing it in a repeatable fashion. So put those snippets of your prompt that you ask it to be able to generate that VLOOKUP the previous time it worked. Put that in a notebook, put it in a notepad, put it in a certain place so that when you're asking Copilot, it will then reference that and be able to help you out, save you some time. I know it's not as functional as some of the stuff out there, but it is safe, it's going to be familiar, and it is going to be available for immediate use to a lot of your employees. Pro tip, that is where long term you may want to look in. We're going to talk a little bit later about having local LLMs. This is kind of dipping your toe into what it means to have your content sourced and held locally. that is going to be able to come into all of your content generation. So these notebooks and having it in Copilot is a great way to have that central repository of information controlled by management, controlled by marketing in a very low stakes environment. So when your users are ready to start, they're going to do it in a more safe fashion than cutting and pasting to the public LLMs like ChatGPT. So that's kind of how I look at it. The next piece, let's say what makes a real AI agent. So now let's take Copilot and kick it up just a bit. Let's say that your team is now comfortable with Copilot. Now let's start looking at how to put it to work while you sleep. That's where you're going to want to look at having those repositories and having it take action and building the intelligence. So I'm going to talk about this. We're going to start with the brain of these foundations of an AI agent, and we're going to go through the 4 layers of it. So I like to start with the brain layer. The reason for this, you're going to pick we're going to try to get this deployed quickly without as much back and forth, and be able to deploy quickly and iterate along the way. So the brain and the intelligence, we're going to pick our LLM. So the best ones here are going to be your ChatGPT, your Claude, your Gemini, or an open source like Llama, something of that nature. You got to decide, cloud versus local. We'll talk a little bit more about local, and choosing the right model for what you're going to automate. You don't want to use a sledgehammer to install a thumbtack. That's where you're going to need to break out that little hammer to just tap it in. That is the right model. Sometimes people are deploying these really big multi-billion token models in their automation, and it slows things down versus a fraction of a second and overthinking things. You could actually get yourself into more trouble by having a model. If you're not doing reasoning and you're not needing access to the internet for this, and you're looking for a repeatable process, a smaller, more refined model that has been boiled down to a particular task is going to work better, especially on automation. I have an automation that I crafted that uses actually a very small model and is able to do reading of documents and processing of what's coming in via an email. I don't want it to have too much intelligence because I want it to have the right answers quickly. Next thing you're going to do is, we've defined what our brain is going to be. Now we're going to take the integrations, which are kind of the hands and feet, the operations of what it's going to do. So here we need to look at what tools we're going to tie into the agent. So this is where we're going to say, we're going to tie it into our email, our CRM, our Slack, a backend database. What do we want to have as our elements that need to talk to each other? You want to do this in your defining stage, because sometimes the data is not really accessible. Well, do you know if that HR data is even available via API or a way to bake the triggers off of the HR system? These integrations, it's best to get involved quickly and figure out what are going to be the tie points. Using the body analogy, the next thing we're going to do is going to be the instructions. So this is really the DNA of the operation of the agent here. So we're going to create our prompting, and that's going to be the rules of engagement. And what you can do here is actually use ChatGPT or one of the LLMs to create your prompt to use with it. Tell it exactly what you're going to do. I'm trying to create an agent to do this. Help me craft my prompt. And then go in and tune the prompt for your particular use case. So start off with the prompt it's going to give you, and it's probably going to be better than what you would have thought about. It's going to be a little more robust. They're really good at creating prompts for themselves these days. So especially if you give it the criteria, you get better outcomes. This is where bad instructions always equal bad outcomes, and lack of instructions can also equal bad outcomes. Tight instructions, tight frameworking, and telling it is going to give you much better outcomes, as well as cut down on the frustration when it comes iteration time. The final piece to this body analogy is going to be the memory. So this is where you're going to do what we talk about sometimes, retrieval augmented generation. We're going to have our content. We are going to feed it what we need it to know. So as we talked about having the brand strategy, having the brand documents, you want to be able to feed into your agent what is needed for it to be able to do its job. Think about if you're training an intern. You need to tell them, here is the phone numbers you're going to call, here's what you're going to do, here's going to escalate. think of that knowledge that you need to put into the model, to put into your system to be able to get that type of output from the agent. So what you do and when we code these agents, new requests don't affect the memory. Our memory is done at load up time. We can decide whether it's going to keep what it learns along the way or not keep what it learns. There's use cases for both, depending on what type of system. If you've got a chatbot and you've got a lot of users that might ask silly questions and could pollute the outcomes, then you don't want to have that go into the memory. You want to take your base memory and push out. Now, if you're looking to have something that is going to evolve over time and be able to ask questions and answer questions in the future that it can't today, that is where having the memory have that short-term memory and be able to bring that back into the model. So that's something you need to think about, is what's the short-term, the conversational memory, and what is the long-term, the company use case and SOP manual on this. What do you want to remember? What do you want to forget? Those are big questions to answer while you're trying to look at this. The other piece to this is going to be figuring out what are your critical elements that it has to be able to answer a certain way, and what are the critical elements that it needs to make sure it's got guardrails to not hit and make sure. So what I like to do there is cross-check the models, and we even put in place with our models. Anytime I spin up my model, I also have my validation. So I have a script that runs when I bring up my LLM to say, I'm now going to validate that I'm getting the right answers out of it. So that's really the way that we are able to get the most predictable results. So the next element that we'll talk about here, I mentioned a couple times LLMs and local LLMs. I have conversations with a lot of CTOs and CIOs, and I get a lot of pushback on local. This is where it really gets interesting. My recommendation is for management and for IT departments to budget to have a machine to be able to run local LLMs. It's much better to validate locally and to keep your data, in my opinion, local. Now, where this fell apart and where I had a couple of other CTOs and CIOs look at me funny is like, well, we cloudified everything. Everything's in the cloud. We can't have a machine. And I understand that. As somebody who has cloud machines, and majority of what we have is either in our data center in the cloud. So the fact that I've got a machine here and two at other locations that are got GPUs in them, predominantly for running LLMs locally on them, I understand that. But it is something to consider, because with a local LLM, you can have that sensitive client data accessible by a model on that machine that doesn't leave your infrastructure. There is some hardware investment, about $5,000. That's what you're going to put into it. Make sure you buy it from reputable places, because sometimes you think you're buying, I like the NVIDIA 5090 card as a good entry point to it. It's got enough RAM. So this is a case where that machine can run local models, be able to give you this predictable outcome, give you this predictable information while using the local data and not having to push it up to the cloud. So what I like about this is I'm controlling the model version. I don't have ChatGPT making a change that affects my model. I have trained it, I put up the guardrails, I've tested it, so there's no surprise API changes that come down the pipe, which has happened multiple times, especially when ChatGPT did their last. The other thing, I don't know what compliance you fall under, SOC 2, HIPAA, FINRA, NIST, all of those have got a lot of controls of how you're supposed to protect data, especially now they're becoming much more AI aware. You need to be aware, because you don't want to fail a security audit because you're setting the wrong data up and have somebody pull the logs on that. So, I'm a fan of having and putting that $5,000 budget into an IT budget, especially if there is something that you can get return on investment for it. I've gotten return on investment for my machine. There's been a couple of tasks and client projects we've already done and have gotten good results from it. So basically, you're about a $5,000 cost to get the machine. As the ROI kind of breaks down, the amount of work that a medium-sized IT department would do, and if you're running automations and you're having a number of users run through it, like I'd say $400 in one weekend with the local LLM. That was exactly what it was going to cost me in ChatGPT time. I ended up buying some data off of Google for the project and spending, a few $100s from them, and then $400 is what it was going to take to do the rest of the project. I ran on local LLM. It may have taken a little bit longer than blasting it off of ChatGPT, but I had 0 pauses, 0 downtime, 0 timeouts. So from my frustration, I was able to kick it off. We had a screen here that we were able to monitor and see it running on the screen. So the ROI really works out to be about this. If you're a medium-sized shop, you can probably expect to spend about $2,700 on that. So you're talking about $32,000 a year in running a bunch of tasks like that. And that's where a lot of people are not thinking about what these models in Azure ChatGPT can run you. When you're prototyping, your cost is very minimal, but as you scale this, if you have stuff that are live in production, to run that same workload off of local LLM instead of $32,000, I'm probably looking at some bandwidth. I'm going to use some electricity. My cost estimate was about $15,000, including that $5,000 to buy the machine. So about $10,300 is how it worked out to be to have the extra cost on it, and then $5,000 for the machine there. So my first year savings by having that local LLM is about $17,000. So the other piece of this is, when we talk about the predictability, if you take and put that data in and have that predictable outcome, could you avoid what happened to Deloitte? Probably. With the right engineering and everything, you can refine that model and make sure all the guardrails are up. You can also put workflow around it to make sure that this report goes from point A to point B, and then maybe bounce it off of another model to make sure that your citations are good. So that's really how I would look at validating this. So that'd be my recommendation. Let's say that you're ready to do this. Now, what does the roadmap look like? How long should you expect an IT department to put in some basic automations? Everybody I meet is buying software packages like crazy, hoping to hit that easy button. And I'm sorry, this is still tech. There is no easy button, and we're in the infancy stage of a lot of these tools. If we look back at where we are today versus 2 years ago, they have jumped in leaps and bounds. But that easy button still is not there. We're getting closer to AGI. We're still not there. So let's say you're sold, you want to deploy an AI agent in a responsible way. Where do you even start? So this is kind of the framework that if you were a client of mine, that I would work with you and what we would set out to do this. So we would take what we're going to do for the first 30 days. So in those first 30 days, we're going to define the task. So we're going to define the task by auditing the existing task. So here what we're going to do is we're going to look at what your team does over a 5-day period. Where are they spending their time? Also really good to do this at the first 5 work days of a month, because a lot of times accounting departments are doing stuff to close out the previous month. I talked with an accounting department the other day that takes the first 8 business days to close the previous month. That's actually a pretty long time. And then I said, that's really long. And then somebody else goes, mine are taking 20 days to close the previous month. They really only get a couple days of work done because they're really wrapping up with what was done the previous month. So they're not able to really focus on things, which is why they've outsourced so many of the things. I'm like, well, we got to definitely work on that. So look at the repetitive tasks that are being done and document the steps. Create some good process SOPs around why they're being done, and get rid of the unnecessary tasks. A lot of times when you do this, there's stuff there on Excel document that are unnecessary. Excel is where a lot of this data is going in and out of. I can't tell you the number of times we start this process with somebody. We look at the Excel document and go, okay, what is this, this, and this? And they go, well, that's no longer used. We don't really look at that. I'm not sure what that is. So you have any of those in the tracking, in your KPIs, in your accounting, in the data that you're processing through, drain those unnecessary tasks. Get them off the automation list, because you don't want to automate something that's not going to be used. You're spending money for the automation. We're trying to streamline the process here. So that's really the first 30 days. Then the end of that, what we're going to do is also define what is the most important. What is going to be important of those tasks to automate? We're going to map those steps. And then what we're going to do is build that disaster recovery of what happens, and if this process has to roll back to human, we're going to start defining what our rollback strategy looks like. Because what we don't want to do is, as we're building and validating, is not have a undo button. AI is very temperamental. If you have a model running, and I hear about a lot of companies getting rid of employees by automation, the problem is when they get rid of all the employees, if the plug gets pulled on something, then how do you recover back? And you don't want to have that in your business. So you want to have that undo button or that recovery path. So phase 2, now we're going to start the actual build. So this is going to be about day 31 through 60 is where we're going to hit into this piece. So we're going to start small. We're going to pilot, or in some cases co-pilot with this. We're going to get and build confidence in the elements that we're building with the shareholders, with the people who have stake in it. So we're going to work alongside of them and actually build out, automated summaries. We're going to build out some draft type protocols and iterate it and run it in a parallel environment. The first thing we're going to do is build those elements, then we're going to tie them together. So they're going to be individual nodes, and then we're going to tie them together into our first agent, and then also add validation to that to make sure. So we're going to pick one workflow, whether it's classifying emails, document routing, taking something that is coming into an inbox and taking action on it. And then we're going to, do things like, I like to take my automations and push them to a Teams channel or Slack channel to make sure that the human who is our SME is also getting notification to make sure that they know what is going on along the way. We can see that as well to make sure that we're validating what's coming through. So what we're trying to do here is build confidence and build the audit trails. Also, want to make sure we audit everything so that we've got what web calls were made, what webhooks were hit. Those type of logging will help us debug, but it also helps the humans have good confidence that these steps weren't missed. As part of this, what we're going to do is run through at least 100 test cycles before we even think about putting this to real production. So it's best to have it run a good amount of iterations and have people try to break it and have real client data maybe mirrored to it to make sure that you're getting the right outcomes. So that's the best way to finish up our phase 2 is with having that type of real use, because phase 3 is where we scale and do further iteration on this. So we've just done 100. Now we're going to try to see how we can do this more in a production development environment. So I know it's mixing two things there. It's going to be production development. You're using real accounts. You're going to start using real monitoring dashboards, real-time alerting with Slack or Teams, real auditing with the logging, and check in on it regularly. So you're going to take that 100 steps and now do it for 500 to 1,000 steps and try to do that. And make sure that you're doing things such as we would do a weekly review, if not more, to make sure that we have that checkpoint. We're looking at all the data. We're looking at the email reports that come out and make sure that everything is hitting the way that we expect it to. And then where we go from there is going to be in week 11 and 12. This is where we're going to train the team on how to support it. So we're going to write the effective fully production prompts. We're going to review the prompts, make sure everything is right. We're going to build the trust in the AI and let people go, okay, at this point, you shouldn't have to intervene. If you have to, this is what you do. But we're going to make sure that we've got it to the point where it should be self-correcting and self-reporting when it does have a problem. And then we're also going to run a trial of the escalation protocol. So what we will do there is, a lot of times on week 11, at the end of the week, we will actually click off the automation and go, okay, we now need to have our fallback and do this. And then in week 12, we're going to break the automation. We're going to say, let's say it's a 12-point step process. We're going to break step 10 and see if we can recover from step 10 and have it go back to step 12 without having to reprocess everything. So that's really the best possible outcomes that we're looking for. And if everything works right, from management, I know you're like, how do I get our ROI on this? For most clients, what you're looking at by taking 1 to 2 small processes into a production environment, you can save an average of 10 to 20 hours a week. So this is what we see. It's kind of what the industry sees. When you're talking about saving 10 to 20 human hours a week and now off of those processes and getting a good repeatable process, that puts you in a different class today. If you watch my last webinar, 85% of the people have not deployed and gotten the ROI from AI. You want to be part of that 15%. So that's how you can get to that 15% is by kind of following this model. I know it's not by just buying a bunch of off-the-shelf products and plugging them together. It is by methodically plugging your processes together and putting in place into your environment what works best. It's also best when the team understands the AI capabilities and limits. You want to keep pushing the team and their capability in AI. I do that every single day, pushing my team to use AI more efficiently in better ways, but also knowing and being forgiving when they're banging their heads because AI is not doing exactly what they think it do. It's not going to be, the fix for everything. It's going to be a fix for some of these repeatable tasks. And the other piece of this that I suggest is put a measurable ROI model together. So look at the KPIs that you can pull from your AI agent. Is it going to be error reduction, ticket reduction, time save, cost savings? Those ROI models make it a lot easier when you're trying to get additional budgets from the CFO or board of directors to justify, hey, why do we need to spend $1 million on this? If you're going to go for a big budget ask, you need to have that ROI model thought out. And by doing a couple of test projects and getting an ROI and saving 10 to 20 hours, you can then exponentially grow that and say, well, because we're going to save 200,000 hours. That's why we need to spend this type of money. So, the other success factors, that I get put in front of various board of directors quite frequently, and I'm called to be that AI person that a board may ask to speak to help get justification for money on this. So I would go, if I were talking to your board of directors, I would say we're going to start with the high volume, low risk task. That's going to be something non-sexy, email routing. We're going to validate first. We're going to make sure that the infrastructure for the automation is working the way we expect it to. We're going to have that human review for the first 90 days to make sure that we're not doing things that we shouldn't. And we're going to run that for the first 1,000 executions of the task, let's say. We're going to measure everything. So measurement is KPIs, measurement definitely key. So tracking that time saved, track our error rate, track our failures, come up with when we do have a failure, go back to our root cause analysis. There's a lot of times where we say is money spent on a root cause analysis. I'm a big fan of Six Sigma, is very valuable. So a lot of times you go, oh, well, it failed because of this minor thing. Well, if you don't go back to the full root, you're not going to eliminate it. That's where I think a lot of times you're looking for the thing that the client or management's going to buy when it's a root cause analysis. Sometimes you don't like to do the 5 whys or go back to what the real root cause of something failing is. Inside the AI world, that's uber important to make sure that you do that, to make sure that when the agent breaks, the human's there to back it up, but also we figure out why it broke, to keep it from breaking in the future, because building these critical processes that we're going to have run 24/7, my environments have to run 24/7. We're talking about fintech systems. People want to know how much money they have in the bank. That's why we have to make sure that anything touching with AI is going to have these validation layers, but also have the recovery layers and have the systems to make them self-correcting. This brings us to the fork in the road, the decision. This is an inflection point for a lot of companies on AI. AI agents are no longer experimental because there are people pulling them off. Your board is going to hear about people pulling them off. They're production ready, and now it's going to be your company turn, but only if you build them right. So this is a really important place for a lot of companies here. As we go into 2026, a lot of board of directors, especially, I hear it on CNBC a lot, is around the AI decisions and what they're able to do. Are they able to build these systems that are trustworthy and validated, or are you going to take the easy button? Sometimes, companies are putting in and trying to plug in a piece of tech. I met with a CEO of a small startup company who was putting HIPAA adjacent data, maybe not HIPAA data yet, it was HIPAA leading data, into ChatGPT open model using the public internet. About fell on my chair. No, we're not working with that company because that's not something we're going to be involved with. That is a recipe for disaster. We like to build our AI modeling to use the proper way and to make sure we've got that trust validation layer and that we are looking to have a certain level of dependability from the automation and from the compliancy. So, we want to have these processes that we take from being 100% human today to 95% automation, 5% human. And then I would say I'm going to add an extra 10% in there, which is having the automation validate itself and have a secondary check-in model. And yes, that gives us to 110%, but that's actually what I look for in a lot of the processes that we do is, can we build reliability and transparency and automation all at the same time? That's really a win-win. And it's up to your company on which direction you're going to do. Are you going to take a model like this? It's about what discipline is the company going to take when looking at doing the right deployment of these particular models. So I want to leave you with one question, one thing to think about here. Should you be looking at AI agents right now, or is it too early? Yes, you should be looking at AI agents. You should definitely be looking at what you can automate. You should have some budget in your 26 budget for AI deployment. I'm going to say you should have some budget in there for AI experimentation. And I know that a lot of people are trying to cut AI budgets as quickly as possible. So there are ways you can do that. It's easier to blow it up a little bit and then cut back if you have overspent than to try to play catch up, because it's like trying to do building construction when there's no drywall to be found. That happened to a lot of places here. All those materials cost more. So if you're trying to play catch up, it's not an easy time. Engineering costs, it's going up. You're better to take a short-term amount of bloat and then come back and refine it. Should we use AI agents? Yes, absolutely. That's what we're talking about here is no, should we start with AI agents? I would start probably with simple answer chatbot agents and then look at your automation agents. That is going to be a little bit easier to deploy, because what you're going to do there is you're going to start with these blocks coming together and build out that knowledge base. So if you can get all of your FAQ type data together, that's a good way of putting a chatbot into something. Copilot is also a great way to have a chatbot for your employees. So think about deploying internal chatbot before you deploy on your website. I see everybody putting a chatbot on there. Everybody putting a chatbot on their website to answer any and every question. That is still best by a decision tree, in my opinion. I would have FAQs, keyword match, and go off a decision tree. And then if the question doesn't fit, then AI agent it. What's the minimum team size to deploy AI agents effectively? That is dependent on your amount of data and the size of your company. I would say that you're going to want to have a subject matter expert, a project manager, and a data person, and then somebody who knows how to do the API development. So in my mind, your minimum size should probably be 4. I have seen people who, with Power Automate from Microsoft, Copilot, be able to do it in a one-man shop. I know of a place that's been able to do some great automations around taking onboarding of employees or removing of employees and taking the automation triggers such as the HR system to be able to light up an account in O365, even order a computer, do those type of steps. So those are good AI focused. And given that that is really Power Automate and staying inside the Azure umbrella, I feel more confident doing that because the data that you would be exposing there is already in the Azure environment. So you're really keeping it in that Azure ChatGPT and Azure automation layer. So let's see if I have any more questions here. How do I handle AI agent failures in production? Yeah, so that's a good one. So when we talk about the logging, there are applications out there. Redis is one that allows you to easily log what you are asking of the agent and what the inputs and outputs are. I think that's very important. What you want to think about is the steps being queued up. So when you're designing these agents in a level that we are, you don't necessarily think about them linearly. Step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It is easier to design a step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and have your recovery. Honestly, we think a little more in 3D today with it. A year ago, 2 years ago, we started everything with make, and it was like step 1, step 2, this. You draw your lines. It's a very flowchart-ish. Today, we'll put smart agents in there, and you kind of got to think of some of those agents as being very deep, or you come into it and it's going to make your decisions and may fire off two, three things at the same time, gather the data back and push it back. Don't start there. You're going to see a lot of models, and I may be responsible for putting one or two of those out onto the internet, showing off some of the wild automations that we've done. But that's not a great place to start, and especially if you're building your first agent. Think about it in step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, because it's much easier to replay. The replayability, when I am dealing with a 3D model or a reset on that, that is much harder and is very dependent on having everything logged and to know what steps need to complete and have the decision of why it is going step 1, 4, 2, 3 instead of 1, 2, 3, 4. Because there are times that you may fire off in that and get reuse of code. We like to have reuse of code, especially when developing. That is something that, development shops, we use reuse of code all the time. We employ that into modeling to be able to use with the AI agents. If you guys have any additional questions, put them into further comments. Be sure to hit me on LinkedIn. I'll be happy to answer the questions. You can schedule up sales@wte.net if you wanted to hit us up and schedule an appointment for us to talk through this. Every time I talk with a CEO or a CFO in particular, I get a lot of, here is where our big company problems are, and this is what is costing us a lot of time. Most of the time, I book those calls for 30 minutes. I will say I haven't had any of them ever hit 30 minutes. We always end up hitting a number of things that the company is going, hey, we have all of these problems. Where do we even start? Where do we get our most ROI? That's why I do these type of webinars, is to give you an entree into some of that thinking, to get you thinking about what you can do with your company to better automate and to get this type of return on investment. Because we want to make your company competitive. We want to make sure that your EBITDA grows, you're able to scale your business. And that's the whole point of these AI webinars, and by why you use AI technology and use this type of system in your business, is to make sure that you're part of that 15%, not part of the 85% that are not being able to get gains out of the technology innovations that are going on right now in this environment. Thank you.